I'm waiting on my producer.
Okay. Okay. If it's not ready, let me add something else. Oh, what is this? Okay.
Sorry, Uncle Edem, we're having a few technical problems.
Okay.
Okay, welcome to the IMANI REVEALS show. This is where we speak, we are real so that we can live. I'm happy that God has given us another Monday to discuss another very important topic. Before we go on, we'll say a word of prayer. But before the prayer as well, I want to remind us, if you haven't subscribed, go to YouTube, just type in the IMANI Reveals Show, subscribe, and also share the link so that others can also benefit from our discussions. Shall we pray? Father, we are so grateful unto you. Monday by Monday, you grant us the opportunity to speak, be real about life's issues, so that we can live the abundant life that you've given us. We commit the session into your hands. We know that you've gone ahead of us. Do as you will, speak through our guest, that at the end of the day, we'll know exactly what to do where our elections this year is concerned. We pray for everyone who will join, that you speak to them. For those who've forgotten, we ask that you remind them that they'll join us to have a fruitful discussion. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. And one more thing before I introduce our guest. You can type your questions and your comments in the YouTube chat, and I'll read them as we go along. So today we have someone who is not new to the channel. He's in the person of Mr. Edem Senanu. I'll read a brief profile about him for those who don't know him. He's a management and development consultant with almost 30 years working experience. He's Ghana's representative to the AU Advisory Board Against Corruption. Considering the process through which he was nominated and assigned, he's supposed to be called Honorable Senanu, but he doesn't like titles, so we'll just call him Mr. Senanu, or as some of us call him, Uncle Edem. He's the co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. He's the presiding elder for the Legon Interdenominational Church, that's my church, and chairman for Advocates for Christ Ghana, among other hats. He indeed wears a lot of hats. He's a committed Christian, married to Monica Senanu, and they have two lovely daughters, Ajwa and Anekia Senanu. He's passionate about promoting discipleship and focusing on Christ-likeness. So, as we always say, without much ado, I'll call on Uncle Edem to talk to us. Today our topic is Election 2024. To vote or not to vote. The main reason why I chose this topic is because personally it's been quite difficult for me to figure out who to vote for. We've had this bipartisan situation for a long time, and it seems like it's almost impossible to get rid of. But at the same time too, they are not exactly delivering on their promises. So the question is, do we take the risk and try and vote someone else in, not knowing whether it will break this bipartisan thing, or what do we do? So that's why we are here today. And hopefully by the end of this discussion, God will give us the answers so that we can do right by our nation, so to speak. So Uncle Edem, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, thank you very much. And good evening to you and all the wonderful people who have joined this link. Whilst you were speaking, there was a lot of feedback. I hope that you're not getting feedback as I speak. So I could barely hear you very clearly.
Is it better?
But yes, you are sounding much better now.
Okay.
So a lot of what you said was not clear.
So sorry about that.
Yeah. So, but let's jump into business.
Great.
Unless there's something you want to say again.
No, you can go ahead.
Can I proceed? Okay, great.
Yeah.
So this evening we are looking at election 2024, to vote or not to vote. And I hope that as you join me on this journey, the Lord will grant me clarity of thought and articulation, and allow you to be impressed with the arguments that I'll be trying to make, so that we all arrive at the same conclusion. My outline, probably covering about areas. I'll give an introduction, a working definition, talk about who is qualified to vote, why is voting important. Then we'll go into democracy, key pillars of democracy, a brief history of democracy in Ghana, the constitutional position, a biblical position, and then I'll draw a conclusion on the matter and we get into questions and answers.
Okay.
One of my most favorite quotations of all time is from the development economist Michael Todaro. And he has said that it is the human resource of a nation and not its natural nor physical resources that determines the character and pace of development. In other words, ultimately, it is not about whether we have found oil and we are finding more oil, or we found lithium, or whether we had bauxite or gold or gas or timber or marble. The resources by themselves will not generate a result that brings progress. Because ultimately, it is people who must manage these resources. And
Yeah.
if they don't manage them well, it doesn't matter how much oil you find, there'll be a problem. So people are important. And I want us to keep that at the backdrop as we take this journey. That ultimately, the data and the research shows that people matter. And so my slide now, you will see a picture of people. Whenever I'm engaging in rural settings, whether I'm training district assemblies or in communities, training community leaders, I like to remind them that although we typically have that posture of arguing that we don't have money, we need money to be able to do things. My experience has taught me that money does not hang in a vacuum. It is people who make money. And therefore, if you have people, you have the greatest asset of all time. The question is, how do we harness that richness, diversity of people and help them, work along with them in order to get results? A favorite example of mine is that if my car breaks down and I have a mechanic who is a friend, I call him, I'm sorted. If my daughter is unwell and I need a solution, I call a doctor who is a friend, get something on phone, I have a result. People are the ultimate resource. Keep that in mind. The ultimate resource of all time for any nation, any continent is people. I couldn't help but notice how the structure of our question for this evening, election 2024, to vote or not to vote, was very much parallel, synonymous with this quote by Shakespeare: to be or not to be, that is the question. It is a quote from Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question. To exist or not to exist. And fundamentally, for me, that's what we are talking about. Our proposition and topic this evening is structured along the lines of this very well known Shakespearean quote. It is found in his famous soliloquy of Act 3, Scene 1. And in this scene, the prince tries to solve the dilemma between life and death, that he feels tortured. And he says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say, we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. The prince was debating, is it worth living with all the challenges and the pain? Or is it better to die and not be going through all this turmoil? And I think that the proposition, when we say to vote or not to vote, really we are talking about existence or not to exist. And hopefully, by the time we end, you agree with me. So ultimately, this is a choice we are making whether to exist or not to exist. It is truly a choice between life and death. And hopefully, you will understand it very soon. What do we mean by vote? the proposition is to vote or not to vote. So, a working definition of vote. The Oxford Dictionary defines vote as expressing your choice or opinion, especially by officially writing a mark on a paper, by raising your hand, or speaking in a meeting. And so this evening, for our purposes, what we are talking about is, should Ghanaians express their choice or opinion by officially or formally placing a mark on the piece of paper that the Electoral Commission of Ghana will be providing to us? And I expect it should be December 9th, unless things change. Some arguments here and there. So voting, we are saying, should we as Ghanaians formally express our choices or opinion by placing a mark on the piece of paper that will be provided by the Electoral Commission of this year? And this is important because that decision to express our choice or opinion will determine who becomes president or who becomes a substantive member of parliament for our various geographical constituencies. And this is what we are talking about. Should we express our choice or opinion by officially participating in placing a mark on the paper that will be provided? Who is qualified to vote? Article 42 of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana indicates that every citizen of Ghana who is 18 years of age or above and of sound mind has the right to vote and is entitled to be registered as a voter for the purposes of public elections and referenda. So precisely, we are talking about Ghanaians 18 years or above who are of sound mind. So this proposition of to vote or not to vote concerns Ghanaians 18 years or older who are of a sound mind. That is the constituency we are looking at the moment. Why is this issue of voting important? And I'd like to quote from Professor Joshua Douglas of the University of Kentucky Law College. He states that voting is the foundational, indeed fundamental, concept for our entire democratic structure. We think of voting as fundamental because it's the most fundamental of rights in a democracy. When a group of citizens collectively elect their representatives, that effort to elect affirms the notion that we govern ourselves by free choice. An individual's right to vote ties the person to the social order, to things happening around us. And even if that person chooses not to exercise that right, by choosing or not choosing to exercise that right, you are either positively influencing the social order around you and the circumstances around you, or you are choosing not to positively influence, and therefore you are negatively impacting the social status, and not just social, economic, and other spheres of life around you. Voting represents the beginning of everything else that any democracy offers to its citizens. Everything else in democracy follows and is built on the principle of voting and the right to vote. Participation by voting, therefore, is more than just a simple choice. It is a fundamental virtue that undergirds our democracy and all democracies across the world. And that understanding is key. I find that 90% of Ghanaians are illiterate in terms of the understanding of what the animal democracy means. And that illiteracy contributes to the fact that we do not participate actively in the processes that consolidate democracy and the processes that ensure that the dividends of democracy inure to us as citizens. And so for the large majority of us who are complaining about democracy not working, it is because we are not satisfying and fulfilling our obligations under a democracy that can thrive and that can grow. If you want to look at other democracies, whether it's the UK or the US, you'll find that they had over 200 years of developing the institutions that have made democracy work. We have not got it to 200 years. And the iterative growth and enhancement of their democracies was mainly because citizens chose to actively contribute to the refining of the processes and the systems. When the citizens checked out, those democracies ceased to actually grow and be nurtured. So let's keep that at the back of our mind. What is democracy? So I'm trying to build the arguments. Democracy, literally said, is ruled by the people. It comes from Greek words, two Greek words, demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. Demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning power. In other words, democracy can also be described as power of the people. It is a way of governing and governance that depends primarily on the will of the people. Central, therefore, to the notion of democracy is participation by all people. Central to the notion of democracy is the fact of participation by all people. And that is why voting is fundamental. Voting is an expression of participation. Abraham Lincoln put it this way: government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's what makes a democracy. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. So to the extent that you begin to see that people are moving out of influencing and participating in decision making, the legitimacy of that democracy and the legitimacy of the democratic processes, including policies that are formulated, laws that are enacted, is bankrupt. Laws are legitimate. Democracies are legitimate to the extent of the participation of the people, who therefore will own those laws and ensure their execution, own the democracy, and ensure that the democracy works for the benefit of the public good. Consequently, the idea of democracy derives its moral strength and its popular appeal from two key principles. One, the principle of individual autonomy, and that is that no one should be subject to rules which have been imposed by others. In other words, you want to participate and you want to vote so that you will not be subject to the rules of a group that say that now we have made it possible for females to go into male washrooms and males to go into female washrooms, and we have 64 genders and counting, and we must all describe people by their pronouns. Individual autonomy, which is something that grounds and fundamental to democracy, says that no one of us should be subject to rules, policies, laws that have been imposed on us by other people. And that is why we need to participate. Because if we don't participate, others will make the rules, others will take their decisions, and will be the worse off. The second principle that is key to the appeal of the principles of democracy and the idea of democracy is equality. The idea that all of us should have the same opportunity to influence decisions. And we'll find very soon that in the Ghanaian Constitution, Article 34, 6D, this is also clearly established, that citizens should be able to influence decision-making at all levels of governance. Equality, the notion that all of us should have equal opportunity to influence decisions, whether it is who becomes president, who becomes MP, what policies and laws are passed. That is the other appealing part of democracy, that all of us will have an equal opportunity to determine that this decision is good for us, but that decision is not good for us. And so we can decide that, no, we believe that in our jurisdiction, we want a law that establishes that the proper human and sexual rights are these, and that some people should not come up with their own sexual orientation and practices and foist those notions of practices as law and rights that we must also kowtow and be subjugated by. So if you do not want others to impose the rules on you or on us, if you want to uphold your right to influence the decisions that affect you, you must participate. And voting is the principal, the primary, and the fundamental step that begins to set in motion all of these processes. And just to further consolidate our understanding of this issue, I want to refer to three key pillars of democracy and good governance. There are various definitions and factors that affect democracy and good governance, but three that are universally recognized as key to sustaining the concept of democracy are: one, the pillar of participation. Citizens and citizen participation is crucial for democracy to thrive. The second key pillar of any good democracy is accountability and transparency. And usually we will say that to undergird this or to make sure it is happening, you need to have a right to information law in place and operational for accountability and transparency to be entrenched. So for many years, when Ghana did not pass, for the 19 or so years where we had not yet passed the Right to Information Act, this was one of the very weak points of our democratic experience. And anytime we did an assessment of democracy in Ghana, it used to come up that the lack of accountability and transparency, mainly highlighted by the indicator of not having a right to information. But fortunately, we now have that, because that then begins to provide a basis to insist that leadership should be transparent. The actions they take, the reports, the decisions, whether it's procurement related, one can go through this act and demand and ask for copies of the processes to understand whether it was fair, whether there was justice, whether there was no conflict of interest. Accountability and transparency is fundamental to holding leadership accountable, and it's important for democracy to be sustained. The final key pillar for democracies to thrive and be sustained is what we call systems and control. Under systems and control, each jurisdiction that says it is democratic must develop systems that monitor and control the management and utilization of rights, resources, and opportunities. And typically what we are talking about is that the arms of government must exist. So you must have a judicial system in place, therefore, so that it can adjudicate over rights, can ensure that justice is protected, rights are respected, promoted, and fulfilled. It means that there must be the executive branch that is executing things, plans, and policies on behalf of the people. It means that you must have the legislative branch that keeps to come up with policy and understands that policy is dynamic and changes over time and must take on board the changing circumstances and situations of the people. And so our laws ought not to be static, but improving and being enhanced with time. So systems and control is the last key pillar of a good democracy. To a large extent, pillars 2 and 3, we seem to have done a lot of work. Pillar 1, even though enshrined in our constitution, as far as I'm concerned, Ghana lacks sufficient and adequate platforms, spaces, and channels to entrench participation by citizens. And a lot of the lack of accountability, the mismanagement we see, is because those platforms, spaces, and channels for citizens to be at the table to ask the right questions, to enrich the policy-making process, do not exist. Honestly, a lot of the policy mistakes we've made, whether it is Ejapa or it is Momo or what, is because we did not have sufficient citizens with the rich diversity of knowledge and expertise on the various subject matters at the table where those policies were being made. If we had the right caliber of citizens, whether civil society, whether media, at the table each time, the mistakes or missteps of government would have been reduced and minimized, and Ghana would have been a better place. And I say this with all humility. It is because I've done a lot of work in developing the national policy framework for participation in Ghana, and I see that we actually have not understood that component of democracy. And as I said earlier, voting is the principal, initial right to participation that all of us must fulfill if we are contributing to a democracy that works. Let me further enhance the importance of participation by looking at democracy in Ghana and specifically our efforts at deepening decentralization through the instrumentality of a constitutional arrangement and through laws. So according to history, Ghanaian communities and societies have always had democratic governance that involved people and representatives, including our chiefs, our sub-chiefs, our elders, our family heads. The 1957 Independence Constitution was intentionally designed, and all constitutions are designed, as it were, to entrench and promote participation by citizens. Our 1960 Republican Constitution created more regions as a way of getting more groups of people in diverse geographic locations to participate, to have an opportunity to have a say in how they influence governance. The Local Governance Act 1961, Act 54, further divided our country, Ghana, into cities, municipalities, local area councils, again, and also recognized village, towns, and area committees as a way of further deepening participation of different groups, whether ethnic or otherwise, and trying to make sure that all these groups are represented and have a say in influencing what happens at the national level. Because don't forget the two principles we looked at. The Local Administration Act 1971, Act 359, amended in 1974, created a 4-tier structure, 58 districts, 273 municipals, area, urban, and local councils. All these further divisions have been created over time to enhance and consolidate participation. The 1979 Constitution empowered Parliament to enact a law to create district councils, village, town, and area development committees, again, to enhance participation, active participation by citizens. In 1980, we recreated space for traditional authorities to provide more spaces and platforms and channels for different groupings to have their voice brought to the table to influence what happens. PNDC Law 207, passed in 1988, also further enhanced decentralization. It was replaced in 1993 by Act 462, again to deepen participation. And much more recently, in 2016, we passed the Local Governance Act, Act 936, which again has even now very specific chapters on participation, on local economic development, all intended to enhance the fact that citizens, if they are not at the table, if they are not active participants, their richness and diversity is lost on influencing what makes a nation better, and therefore that is not what we seek to do under a democracy. Clearly, therefore, a key reason for Ghana's continued decentralization process and the repeated enactment of new decentralization laws has been the simple, critical desire to increase citizens' participation in local governance and in democracy. All All the modifications we have done have sought to enhance the role of citizens, although these have been done to achieve this at different levels of focus or of the government system and arrangement. Let's look at the constitutional position on this matter of to vote or not to vote. And I want you to look at the trajectory. I want to try and underscore the spirit behind certain portions of our constitution. The directive principles of state policy in Article 35(6)(d) states democracy should be made a reality by, and it underscores two things that must happen. First, decentralizing the administrative and financial machinery of government to the regions and districts. So the first part is to decentralize administrative and financial functions of government to regions and districts. Now, please pay attention to the second part. And by affording all possible opportunities for people to participate in decision-making at every level in national life. Hello? I need us to understand that what it is the Constitution is saying is that democracy can only be real when citizens and people are afforded all possible opportunities to participate in influencing decision-making at all levels of national life. It is this spirit, it is this trajectory that for me is the epitome of the near crisis we face as a society. That because we have not intentionally, strategically provided those platforms at all levels, whether it's ministries, departments, whether it's parliament, that other people with skills and knowledge who can bring those skills and knowledge to influence decision-making and policies so that they are steered in the right direction to the benefit of the majority. That's why we are struggling. And I'm trying to suggest that when people then decide to jettison the idea of being at the table or ensuring that their rights of what can be done better, the improvements and enhancements that God has, laid on their heart, when they think that leaving the situation because it's bad, I am tired, I'm frustrated, you are contributing to ensure that democracy does not become real. This is your constitution. It states categorically, democracy should be made a reality, and it gives us two things: decentralization and providing the opportunities for citizens to influence decision making. Article 35(6)(d) therefore underscores that decentralization is critical to ensure participation and a better democratic experience in terms of the dividends that will inure to all of us. It is an important constitutional right. Again, let me look at chapter 20 of the Constitution. In chapter 20 of the Constitution of Ghana, Article 24, 2E, it says that to ensure the accountability of local government authorities, people in particular local government areas shall, as far as practicable, be afforded the opportunity to participate effectively in their governance. Again, what the Constitution is saying is that accountability can only be achieved to the extent that citizens are provided the opportunity to participate effectively in governance. If citizens at the local level are not going to the district assemblies, are not asking the questions on the budget, how the road was done, why the road is not straight, why the quota is coming off. This is how it works elsewhere. The local assemblies in the UK, a street light is not working. That town hall meeting at the end of the quarter, you are going to have a British citizen come there and ask, why are those lights in that? And some public officer at that local level is going to lose his job. His head is going to roll because citizens are reporting what is not working and demanding as taxpayers that what must be done to ensure that things work is being done. Accountability cannot happen in a vacuum. It only happens to the extent that the citizens of the nation are participating. And you can see I'm very passionate about Participation. I probably am the only one who really understands this because of the kind of work I have done in this space. It is so crucial. A lot of what is not working in this country is simply because we have not intentionally and strategically developed those permanent, regular platforms for intentional engagement and solution. Allow the politicians to kick out everybody who is a technocrat who, no, let me not say everybody, but we came to play that divide and rule. And if people have something to offer, we shun them, we exclude them, they kick them out. So they're not at the table. And then we proceed to take decisions. And at the end of the day, we look back and we're wondering, why did this happen? What is happening is that the animal democracy and the fundamental pillars that make it work, including the pillar of participation, which requires that those of us, those who have the best knowledge in any aspect of what we need to do as a nation, must be brought to the table. They must be there to provide their skills and knowledge. They must be participating if we are to get the best outcomes. Participation is crucial for ensuring accountability. Let me go to the biblical position. I wasn't able to capture all the ideas I had on this, but my first thought, and when I used to do a lot of work in participation, the first thing that struck me that was that right from Genesis, and one of my findings is that there's no concept of philosophy worth articulating either in management or development that does not find its root in the Bible. There is no management principle that I have worked with that I don't find a far superior concept or notion in the Bible. Same for development. All the development concepts that we work that have, whether it is welfare related, and so at the time we had what the $1 thing, whether you're talking about housing, housing, feeding. The Bible has far superior concepts. This concept of participation, we see it right from Genesis. When God created, then he invites Adam and says, rule over this. That's participation. Inviting us to participate with him in governing. When God invited Adam to help name the animals, the fauna and the flora, that was participation. Because God understood that to the extent that you participate in naming, you own it. You look at it and say, I gave it a name. You have a connection because you participated. It's the reason why when citizens participate in developing the budget for district assemblies, they have a stake in ensuring that that budget is executed once the money is provided. They have a stake in making sure they pay their taxes because they know that the budget that determines how it should be used is there, and they'll have an opportunity to check if the budget is being executed according to what we agreed, and if not, who must we target or say that this person is not performing. Democracy has systems which we are not following, but God is the one who first provided the platform for us as human beings to participate. In Mark 12:17, Jesus was asked a question and he said, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And fundamentally, again, in Romans 13, verse 1, we are asked to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. As Christians, we cannot cut ourselves away from the affairs of the world. We cannot. The statement by Burke, I think it was Edward Burke, who said that evil thrives when good men do nothing. Evil thrives when good men do nothing. It's fundamental and it's biblical. If our light does not shine, when light shines, darkness is dispelled. One of the hearts that Abigail mentioned, my heart of Co-chari, citizens movement against corruption. Many people think that that's the job I do. For me, it's corporate social responsibility. I have become much more known for that. But it is simply because I discovered in 2014 that if Christians do not stand at the gates to determine what goes into the gates and what comes out, and to ensure that the right things are done in this country, we have no right to sit in our comfortable homes and complain. If we are not willing to sacrifice and speak up, stand up, and be counted when it matters most. You cannot cut yourself out of the affairs of the world. That secular sacred divide does not exist in the Bible. Do a good search. God never intended that we will be separate from the world. He expected us to be part of the world so that our light will shine and dispel the darkness. When we're described as salt and light, light has its function. It will expose the obstacles so we can remove the obstacles. It will ensure that we can get to the end of our journey, to our destination safely. But salt also has a key part. It preserves. Salt, if something is decaying, salt can prevent and restore. Salt is known to do that. That's why we salt fish. It doesn't just preserve, it prevents decay. Decay in society, decay in nations. That's salt. Where is our salt and light if we decide to check out? In conclusion, therefore, our proposition was election 2024, to vote or not to vote. And I pointed out to you that Hamlet in Shakespeare said a similar thing when it was said to be or not to be. Because actually it's a choice of whether to exist or not to exist. Research has shown that over time in many democracies, where those of nobler thoughts, of higher aspiration, those to whom the ideals, values of God have been given, choose not to participate. Increasingly, what happens is that they leave a vacuum which is filled by those who are evil, those with much less purer ideals, those who subscribe to things that are wicked, that promote injustice, that do not focus on the welfare of people. And the vacuum left by those who have the values of God creates a situation where democracies slide and become less capable of providing the dividends that the whole notion and concept of democracy was expected and intended to provide in the first instance. That is the risk to our existence that we contribute to when we take a decision not to participate. Let me end by undergirding the fact that democracy only exists and thrives to the extent of the participation by citizens. You are choosing either to ensure that our democracy exists and thrives, or on the other hand, by choosing not to participate, by choosing not to vote, you are serving. Indeed, you are ringing the death knell on our democracy because you have chosen not to participate. Thank you very much for your kind attention. God bless you, and God bless our nation, Ghana. Over to you, Abby.
Amen. Thank you so much. A lot of revelation for me. I don't know about others, but there's so much that you've made me understand. I have a number of questions, but I'll go to the YouTube channel and allow for the questions there before I bring mine on board. So someone asked a question that I also had in mind about this had to do with who is eligible to vote. And you mentioned 18 and above and of sound mind. Is there a definition of the sound mind?
Oh, to the extent that You have not been reported as having a mental health deficiency that makes you incapable of taking sound decisions. Um, that that would be it. So, yeah, sound mind to the extent that there's not been any medical report suggesting that you are incapable of taking sound decisions. You have sound mind.
Okay, okay. And the next one is, how does the constitution, sorry, which, whose responsibility is it to correct the literacy? That's the literacy about democracy.
It's the states, and that's just unfortunate. The existence of the National Commission on Civic Education is primarily to make sure that deficiencies are addressed. So ideally, two modes of education. The schooling system should be doing this. The public system, in terms of the National Commission for Civic Education, needs to make sure that citizens understand their rights and obligations. Unfortunately, many of us understand our rights but don't know our obligations. And if you look at Article 41, I think either F or E talks about we have an obligation and responsibility to contribute to the welfare and the well-being of the state and community. What it means is that if you understand that the well-being of the state is premised on democracy, therefore you have a responsibility to contribute to democracy, and you cannot run away or shirk your responsibility of voting. So Article 41, for example, is one of the things that I am quite concerned that very few Ghanaians understand, that our obligations as citizens are clearly stated and codified in Article 41 of the Constitution.
Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, okay. Thank you. The next question is, couldn't a democracy work against what is morally right?
Well, yes, and the issue is not about morality as much as it is about, and obviously it will depend on the jurisdiction. And that's why some of us are blessed to be in a nation like Ghana, where you have 71.3% Christian. So fundamentally, the viewpoint of God is what the majority have. But democracies are not designed to be principally based on the majority view. The reason why it is government by all people, and both Article 1.1 and Article 35.1 indicate um, government is defined by the states, and those in government are put in place by the citizens who repose power and authority in a group of people for a citizen. So ultimately, power resides in the people who repose power for a certain period. What it means is that ideally everybody's voice should be heard. And the assumption in a democracy is that if all voices are brought to the table and they are represented properly, what will come out of that will be in the best interest of the citizens. That may not always be what we consider as moral. And I think that what we are talking here much more is what is ethical. Because when we say ethics, it's what is right. Knowing what is right, doing what is right, and influencing others to do same. So morals is right or wrong. But really we are saying it might not inure to what is ethical. That is possible if the majority of people in that society, by default, are not ethically conscious. It is the reason why, for those of us in the Christian space, we need to intentionally hand over the values of God from generation to generation. So those ethics will undergird the values of society, and those values of the society will then undergird the policies and the laws we establish. And then you can be sure that somebody will not come and impose a rule or a law that you would not want to be subject to.
Thank you. And then the next one is, good governance possible outside of a democracy?
Well, yes. I mean, there are different kinds of democracies. I mean, it's important to point out that China has this form of governance. Uh, um, we outside will want to call it communist and what have you, but they have succeeded in one way to get people to contribute, to participate. I think that what matters is the spirit of democracy. How do we get people to participate and harness the rich diversity of the knowledge and skills of people in a way that inures to the best, inures to the benefit of the majority of people? And call it by whichever name. And I say this because, I mean, when we look at our traditional systems where we have the chieftaincy system, which existed long before the Westerners proposed and promoted the idea of democracy. At the chief's palace, you would find that the elders are picked as representatives of different families that come together, sit around the chief, and the chief will listen to all the representatives of the different families or communities represented. And obviously, those elders coming would, in one way or another, also do consultations. And when everybody has spoken, then the chief speaks. That's democracy. Before the whites came, I don't know whether we had a single name for it. If we did, that would be part of our rich cultural diversity. So for me, it is a spirit and the notion undergirding democracy that's important. And that is that people must participate and the best of the best must be brought to the table so that the results, the outputs, and the outcomes will surely benefit the people much more than a situation where a minority of family and friends sit and they divide their resources and make themselves comfortable. And they take decisions that, if the rest of us were there at the table, would have shaped, infused, refined, and ensured that those decisions were much better than what they have been.
Okay, so that also brings me to my question, and this is something that came up some time ago. Do you think that democracy is for Ghanaians? Do we want that kind of rule?
I think that the problem or the challenge with democracy in Ghana is the fact that we have not been sufficiently educated on what democracy requires. And so we are actually not practicing democracy. One of my favorite questions when I was going around, I spent about 3 years between 2015 and 2018 going around Ghana 3 times, all the regions, many of the districts, working with assemblies to develop the National Popular Participation Policy Framework. And one of my favorite questions was premised on Article 35(6)(d). And the question was, and let me just project it so that you can understand why it is key. It was premised on the fact that if Article 35(6)(d) says that
Can
democracy
interchange?
should be made real by decentralization and by people participating, then the question I ask is, are people participating? Is our democracy real? Are we actually actively participating? And so is our democracy real? And 9 out of 10 times, most people will say, no, we are not participating. We are not actively there. We are even debating. We are not sure what this animal is. So the answer to me is that we have not sufficiently educated the Ghanaian such that we would have implemented this in a way where when we do the evaluation, we can draw a conclusion and say democracy does not work. Mind you, we have jurisdictions where this form of democracy is working. The Nordic countries, Finland, Netherlands, what have you, it's working. There are jurisdictions where democracy is providing for them the dividends. It does not mean that that is the ultimate choice or would be. You need to do research to draw that conclusion. But from where I sit, knowing what I know, 9 out of 10 Ghanaians don't understand democracy. They don't understand that it took 200 years to fashion what is working in the countries where it's working. Not 50 years. It took them 200 years. Several iterations and improvements of those systems to get to the point where their courts work, the local governance systems work, where town halls, people will go there and demand, why is the road not done? Why we pay tax? The budget we did last year said this will be done. And because in Ghana, the citizens will not be there after the budget has been done to ask, why has the road been diverted? Why are the gutters not there? And we still expect democracy to work. We are confused. We don't understand democracy. So we are not in a position to do that assessment and draw a right conclusion because we have not yet first implemented it according to the precepts of what democracy would require.
Yeah. You talked about the 4-tier structure of governance. Do you think that
was just one of the iterations along the path of getting to the Act 936? We just kept expanding the various tiers, trying to bring more groups and people on board. So we don't still have that 4-tier as it was at the time, but we have expanded beyond that. But please ask your question.
Yes. So if I got it right, that also is in line with the participation.
Yes, all these expansions, every time we say they are creating new regions and districts, it's just expanding representative democracy so that we have more representatives at the table. Those representatives can meet and engage with their constituencies and then go and reflect what the constituencies want. To all extents and purposes, you need to understand that we are not having that. I mean, our MPs are not, they haven't been able to create those platforms where they are regularly meeting with the people on the specific policy propositions that are before Parliament, and therefore going to give the input into those policies and laws. You know, the structure and system as it works elsewhere is not what we are executing here. So there are many ways in which we have not yet properly, implemented democracy as it ought to be. But those expansions are all to make sure that the representatives are better informed by the perspectives and the knowledge and suggestions of the people they represent from smaller groups.
So can we say that this is as a result of the fact that people have been blinded by their loyalty to their parties? Like I learned in philosophy this idea of fallacy of opposition, where the fact that you are from a different divide, even if your idea or suggestion is good for the common, is for the common good, it's not taken. Could it be one of the reasons why this
Yes,
is not
and
working?
I think it's also because the political elite they've understood, they've read the history, they've done the philosophy. They know that for their own personal interests, it's always useful to keep the people in darkness. Ignorance allows them to continue to rape the nation, steal the resources, and enriching themselves. Anybody who really wants to empower people knows that when you empower people, they'll ask more questions. And so there's a certain sense in which the political elite, it is not in their interest to educate the masses and to empower the masses. It is the reason why when revolutions are birthed, often you hear power to the people. Why are they saying power to the people? Why are they saying let's educate them? Why is it that rights become a fundamental part of the advocacy in those spaces? It is because we understand that if people understood their rights and obligations, they will be at the table asking the question. Do not allow the politicians to dribble us. At the moment, I clearly feel that the political parties are the ones creating more of the problems for Ghana. It is not so much the president that we are voting. It's because the political parties have seen elections as a business investment. They raise the money, in election years, and they put you there as a figurehead. So they'll choose somebody who is smiling, gentleman, is articulate. When he speaks, oh, maybe all the women get goosebumps and say, wow, wow, he's handsome, he's what, and we vote. And after a year of allowing him to try and talk and push things, then the political parties begin to rein in and say, nah, we must make our money back. It's time to call in and get our investment.
Yeah.
We don't seem to realize that it is now a political game of business. All parties raise the money, they invest individually and collectively as parties, and then immediately after elections, they seek to pull back that money.
Yeah.
And the single most important thing for us now is to put a microscope on these political parties and their financing. Because if we deal with their financing and make sure that they are not doing extravagant things, they won't come back, and then now they have to make sure they pay off everybody, pay off their debts, and they want to make more money before they leave. We are not educated sufficiently on the democratic arrangements, and so we have a difficulty.
So is there hope? Because you've mentioned that it takes, you said hundreds of years, correct me if I'm wrong, for democracy to mature, in quotes. But here's a case where we don't seem to be making progress. So is there hope for Ghana's democracy?
It is not a linear comparison.
Okay.
The fact that the US or the UK spent 200 years does not mean we need to spend 200 years. Let me make a comparison. Malaysia and Ghana. We got independence in the same year, 1957. Malaysia, just like the other Asian tigers, are miles ahead of us. What did they do? Quantum leap. They learned from other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
You see, when the Japanese or the South Koreans decided that they wanted to make cars that everybody would like to buy, what did they do? They went to the American market. They studied all the special specs on the American cars. Then they found cheap ways of integrated the push button, the rear mirror effect, or collapsible mirrors. Those used to be the luxury components and features of American cars. The Japanese, the Asians just went there, picked them and said, okay, how do we create a simple version, make it a standard of our cars? Next thing you know, we're all buying Japanese and South Korean cars. Period.
Yeah.
Period. And so, was it Napoleon Bonaparte? I can't remember who it was who said that if I've achieved much more than most men, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Can't remember who said it. It's one of these British people said that if I have achieved much more than most men, it is because I stood on the shoulders of giants. We need to leverage the experiences of other nations. We need to learn what did they learn in that 200 years? How do we make sure that we adapt and modify for our jurisdictions so that we have a quantum leap? It is not impossible, but we have refused to learn. And unfortunately, most of us, we have followed the traditional thinking where it's like when you elect, when we put in place a chief, what the chief says is final. We don't want to disturb the chief. Not forgetting that the chief must have elders who must also be wise. So we are not asking the critical questions and providing the critical inputs to our leadership in a way that ensures that they take the best decision. We've left the politicians to do what they want for far too long. And until citizens and people arise and say that I will be at the table, I will always ensure that my voice is heard, we are not practicing a democracy. Our democracy is not real. So it is possible. I mean, all hope is not lost. What it is we need to re-educate ourselves, educate those who don't know. We must ensure that we are at the table. We must make sure that our ideas are influencing the decisions that are taken. If we are there at the table, we will hold accountable our leaders. But when we check out, we give them the room to appoint more of their same kind. And in appointing more of their same kind, those who are thinking of shortcuts to enriching themselves, when they come, they will not follow the procurement rules. They will not try and select the most competent people to have the construction contracts for the schools, the bridges, the roads, the hospitals. The roads will be done and not last 1 year. The schools will be done and they will collapse. The medical facilities will not, there is a rapid chain that leads downhill to death. And that is why I said the question is to be or not to be, to exist or not to exist. When we check out of a democracy, we leave the field wide open for all of those who have evil intentions, state capture, raping the purse, to take over and to plunder the rest of what we have.
It's not an easy one. So the quote you just mentioned, I'm reading that is by Isaac Newton.
Oh, Sir Isaac Newton. Yes.
If I have seen further than
Yes.
others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes. And so I'm encouraging us to stand on the shoulders of giants. Which are the nations that have done well? How do we stand on their shoulders? How do we intentionally select the right people? And the right people may mean that we need to go outside the current political party structures unless we remedy the current monetization of their systems. Because for now, the political economy is such that they have just considered elections is now a political business. It's a political business. And if we are not wising up, it is actually the responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, of Christians to do that education and to ensure that we turn the tide. If Christians are 71.3%, and we even make sure we understand the issues and do the right thing, this is not an impossible thing to do.
So practically, how do we go about it? And even this 71.3%, is that really the situation on the ground? Because when we talk about corruption, it's widespread and Christians are in the majority. It doesn't mean that it's being perpetuated mainly by Christians. If so, then how can the change come?
Well, I'm sure you would realize that the key things that for me are crucial is discipleship and Christ-likeness. Discipleship as a route to Christ-likeness. The quality of Christianity we are experiencing and we see today, which is generally a result of nominalism, is because the agenda that Jesus said in Matthew 28:18-20, all power and authority have been given to me, therefore go ye and make disciples of all men, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have taught you. And lo, I'm with you even unto the end of the age. The problems we face today are a result of spiritual impoverishment. There's a spiritual poverty of the Christian and of the landscape. Because those who are spiritually rich in terms of the values that they have picked from the Bible, that they stand for, integrity, honesty, hard work, these, when they are positioned, propelled into positions and places of authority, are the ones who hold on to what God has told them and ensure that the management of our resources for the common good will be done appropriately and effectively. So fundamentally, the crisis we face is a crisis arising from the failure of the church to implement discipleship adequately so that the members of our churches, when they move out as missionaries into the field every Sunday at the close of the service, when that pastor gives the blessing, what we are doing is to send missionaries out into the missionary field, missional fields, to go and demonstrate, to proclaim the good news of the gospel of salvation, to teach other people the principles of the kingdom, and to heal every disease and sickness. If we were doing that, we would not be seeing the spiritual poverty of corruption that we see. Corruption
Yeah.
ultimately is due to the corruption of the soul.
Okay, there's another question. Are political parties treated as entities that could be audited?
Ideally, under the Constitution, that is what was envisaged. The Electoral Commission law has a place where political parties are supposed to submit their audited statements, etc. But it's not been happening. The checks that have been done show that it's not been happening. And indeed, it's one of the laws that we need to quickly revamp. You know, in my mind, one of the key solutions, you find that I think is the US, where you have a ceiling contribution by every citizen. So if we said every citizen cannot contribute more than, let's say, 5,000 Ghana, and corporate entities cannot contribute more than, let's say, 20,000 Ghana. What it means is that at the end of an election, no political party or political appointee will be beholden to a single citizen, because the citizen gave me 1 million Ghana cedis. So now I have to appoint him as the minister of so and so and so. No political party or president will be beholden to a particular corporate entity because they gave me 20 million Ghana cedis. But on the other hand, what will happen is that the quality of the manifestos that the political parties articulate will need to be convincing and compelling so that many more citizens will want to give their 5,000. Many more corporate entities will want to give their 500,000 or 50,000 to that party, because at the end of the day, it is no longer about I just give as much money, and when they get into power, I'll get jobs and contracts. But it is because your manifesto, the arguments that you proffer, the solutions that you articulate, we connect with them and we can see them as pragmatic solutions to the issues that affect us and to the aspirations that we want to achieve as citizens. That is how it works in advanced democracies. You don't leave the field open for anybody to go and dash 2 million and to make sure that this party wins. And at the end of the day, I also get a position, I get appointed. Or we decide that, for the budget, we need 50 million Ghana cedis. Then we share it amongst people. Any of you who brings a minimum of 5 million, you will get a ministerial position. If you bring 2 million, you get a board chair position, and so on and so forth. All kinds of schemes and gimmicks and machinations, you know. And then after that, we are in trouble, big trouble. Because all these individuals and corporate entities are expecting payback time, either in cash or in kind by contracts. And so the rules of the game change. So, yes, that's a very important question, because one of the key places where we can start is to take a close look at the law that governs accountability from political parties and make sure we have a mechanism to check who is giving the money. Where is the source of the money? Because again, it is not just the internal risks of people with a lot of money, but it's also the money laundering risks. Because you could have a group of criminals sitting somewhere in the Cayman Islands or Barbados, and they have made money through the sale of hashish, cocaine, and like, okay, we'll take over the government of Ghana. So we know that there are only two parties. Let's give each of those parties 100 million cash dollars. And when they get into this, we will now decide which laws they will pass, which contracts they will do, and it will be our people who get all the contracts. This is not just conspiracy theory. It is a potential reality when we do not guard the gates as Christians. And in this instance, we are talking the gate of political party financing.
So how do we get over that? It seems like money is talking a lot. How can we break that?
that is the thing where all of us as citizens must make sure we understand the key things. One of the key things is that constitutional reform is important. The situation where we have an executive president, where the president is all powerful, decides all the key positions from ministerial to board chair. So sometimes it takes 1 year before we have even, assigned everybody. That must change. The situation where the president decides on selecting ministers and deputy ministers from parliament is also not in the best interest, because what happens is that the people in parliament are seeking to carry the favor of the sitting president and trying to catch his eye. So when the executive comes up with policies which are not good, they may go silent because I'm eyeing a ministerial position or a deputy ministerial position. We need to change that. That thing of a majority of the ministers must come from parliament must stop, because parliament, according to the constitution, is supposed to play a supervisory role over the executive. So those things must change. Constitutional change is very key. The executive presidency must change. Also, being at the table. Don't say, I will not vote. Don't say, I will not go and check what is happening at the assembly. We need to teach our children education, that we have an obligation for the sake of the common good to be there at the table. If we are not there, we should make sure we have a representative to speak. Because when we are there, we can hold people more accountable. The more you are there at the table, the less likely it is for things to go wrong. And that understanding must be common. The more all of us agree, whether I'll be there, if I'm not there, my brother must be there, our pastor must be there, somebody must be there to articulate our position, to come back. And if we need to now galvanize, look, many times when things have been stopped, it's been stopped or changed through public policy advocacy. What does that mean? A group of people galvanize many more citizens. And there's something that we call power analysis. We have the power to do something, but we can only do it when we power with other people to have power over the situations that we are confronted with. Okay? It's a development concept. You need to hold hands with other Christians, other well-meaning Ghanaians, when you see an issue that is going wrong. We have examples where, if you take the Lekma area, where a woman took the Lekma municipality to court about the road in front of her house having not been done, and won in a court in Ghana. Won in a court in Ghana. She didn't sit down and just complain. She understood that the responsibility of the local assembly is to make sure that roads, water, electricity is there. If you don't understand that this is an obligation, a responsibility of the assembly, you don't understand that you have a right, a justifiable right, what's the word? Is justiciable. It means you can take it to court. You can go to court and say the assembly, by virtue of the constitution, has a responsibility to take care of these basic amenities. And you can imagine when you make it a class action. We don't understand the rudiments of democracy. So we sit and we complain when we should be holding hands to hold our assemblies accountable. Education will make the difference. You need to read, understand democracy, understand how to hold hands with other people to demand why the street in front of your house is not working. It's not there. Why water is not flowing. Why the water is dirty. Every time that citizens arise, whether it's taxi people and say, will not drive, will not serve until the road is done. When the Lekma road was bad, going to Lekma Hospital, and Joy FM started the campaign, showing pictures, reporting, interviewing people. What happened? Citizens' voices were being heard. In a very short while, what happened? The road was done. That is how democracy works.
Word,
and
I will
it
say.
is not the exception to the rule. That is actually the default.
Okay.
The whole issue of civil liberties and civil actions and rights, led by Martin Luther King and his like in the 60s in the US of A and elsewhere, is based on the fact that citizens must hold hands, stand shoulder to shoulder to champion the cause of what they believe is ethically sound and in the best interest of them of people to bring change. Without a Martin Luther King, there would not have been an Obama. That's democracy at work. It is not the exception to the rule. Look, we say that good governance is never ever readily supplied. It must be constantly demanded. So those of us in the good governance and democratic space, we understand that it will never get to a point where we say that by matter of default posing, automatically, leaders will do what is right. Political parties will do what is right. No. Undergirding the understanding of democracy is that citizens must always constantly demand. We need to educate our children that they have a responsibility to demand what is right. It is not an exception, it's an obligation. And trust me, when the child does not grow up with that understanding, there's a risk to society. When you look at what happened in the issue of the Nazis and that, or what Adolf Hitler ended up doing, it is a perfect example of when there's elite capture and a few people decide that this is what is good for our country and for the world at large. If the German citizen at the time and the children had been educated on their rights and their voices could be heard at the table, trust me, that trajectory may not be what have happened. And so you'll find that in Germany today, the idea of teaching people about democracy and their rights and their obligation to be at the table has been strongly enhanced because they say never again. And the only way they have worked to make sure that never again do they get to the point where a group of leaders will lead them down a road that will totally embarrass and smear their name for generations, is by making sure that the children understand they have an obligation to be there at the table, participate, vote. Let your voices be there to say, no, this is not ethically right. I am saying that one of the fundamental things is for us to understand that we need to organize ourselves to be at the elections, at the assemblies, calling to order our municipal chief executive, district chief executives, calling to order the assemblies, making sure that in budgeting, in assigning the budgeting, the roads that must be done are done, the street lights are there, hospitals must be taken care of, that the resources that are being collected, we are holding them accountable. We can only hold them accountable by participation. You have to be there. And Article 240, 2E of the Constitution has said it, that to ensure accountability, citizens, as far as practical, must participate. It's a lack of understanding and appreciation of our responsibilities. We are not responsible citizens at the moment. 80 to 90% of us are not responsible citizens, and yet we are expecting the democratic dividends of a democracy.
So I'm thinking back to when I was growing up, school, trying to remember if there was enough exposure to governance in Ghana. I think it wasn't until I was in university that I caught bits and pieces of, okay, the constitution of Ghana, governance, etc. Do you think that our educational system is lacking where that is concerned in terms of educating the children as they grow up?
Absolutely. I think that we have a deficit in our educational content. This needs to be taught from primary school. The jurisdictions where things are working, they have nurtured. In fact, when I'm talking about good governance or teaching or do training on good governance and democracies, I point out that in our anti-corruption work, research by Transparency International has shown that one of the key features of the jurisdictions that are growing in leaps and bounds and not experiencing corruption is that they have nurtured a culture of integrity, honesty, hard work, and rule of law from childhood amongst their children. They have intentionally made simplified versions of the various key rights and obligations, especially of the citizen, so that the child begins to understand that to be a Ghanaian These are my responsibilities.
Yeah.
As it is, we do not have a set of values that the Ghanaian child or the Ghanaian citizen lives his life by. We do not have an understanding of the obligations or responsibilities of the Ghanaian child or citizen. And you are right. Until some point in social studies, and it's very even weak, it is not well codified or spelled out. And imagine to the extent that we are not even providing resources to the National Civic Commission for Education. And so it is a dismal situation not actually doing the education, either intentionally through the formal education system or indirectly through public education, through public announcements and efforts on national TV, on radio and TV, or in community engagements and what have you. It's a pretty, poor state of affairs in terms of education. And yes, that is one of the actions we can decide as citizens, as Christians, that we'll begin clamoring for. If you take
God be our helper. There's a final question. Time is past by 2 minutes, but we'll take this final one.
And coming up also with a core set of values that the Ghanaian must ascribe to are key things that we need to promote, and it must become part of the curricular and educational content.
Thank you. We'll take a final question and then we'll call it a night. It says, how can our democracy guard against external influences? Or, do these exist in a democracy at all?
What? I missed the first part of the question.
It says, how can our democracy guard against external influences? Do these exist in our democracy at all?
Well, I think that I described how that is potentially possible. The reason why we have strengthened our anti-money laundering regime in Ghana under IOCO and elsewhere is because if you went back about 5 years, anything could come into the country, which means that people could bring money in by road or by any of the porous parts of our harbors, our borders, and use that to influence, political parties and situations. And yes, there are influences. There are lobbies. Recently, I had to go for, Ghana hosted the Commonwealth Human Rights International Conference. And on behalf of the Coalition for Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values, I represented the coalition as a member of the council. And they were looking at laws. And it was interesting. There was a discussion on one law. And right there, they had flown in people from all the way from Ireland. One man stood up, introduced himself as a gay rights advocate. He's a lawyer. He owns this company in Ireland, or is it Scotland? And he will not be here in Accra, Ghana, at the International Conference Center if certain laws had been passed. And therefore, he's here to say we need to embrace the diversity and so on and so forth. Then another person stood up. And these were not people who were even accredited as being people who should be there for the discussion, but they had been flown in to influence the decision-making process. At the end of the day, there were just two of us, me from Ghana and another person from Nigeria, who voted in a particular direction. Are there influences? Hidden to us, there are lots of platforms, international platforms, where decisions are being taken that affect us and that tie us down, whether it's EU, whether it's ECOWAS, whether it's Commonwealth. And before you know it, chip by chip, they begin to work at getting your government to be compelled to take certain actions. And that's how they begin to turn the situations and make us get to a point where we are even shocked the law has changed and we now have to obey something we didn't want to. So yes, there are influences. And if you don't have people guarding the gates. So Christians need to be at those ministerial platforms where decisions, look, the issue of comprehensive sexuality education, when Advocates for Christ Ghana decided to investigate, at the time we had Dr. Mensah at UNFPA, he's now of blessed memory. And he said, look, we raised money from UNFPA to review of the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy of Ghana, ASRH. After 2 years, when the consultants we had engaged were finalizing, we went to a validation meeting, which was a multi-stakeholder meeting. This was being done under health, but in the multi-stakeholder validation meeting, it was combined with Ministry of Education. And the representatives of Ministry of Education in that final meeting said, oh, why call it adolescent sexual reproductive health? Change the name to comprehensive sexuality education, because that's the current trend. And without understanding, the people voted and changed the name to comprehensive sexuality education. Then the document was handed over to them to make some changes. The next time the document was seen, things had changed. This is in Ghana. It took just one validation meeting for things to start to change. And then when those of us on that call, it was in the middle of COVID. This is like April 2020. And we're shocked. We just want to find out, how does this happen to us? He said, look, I can show you the documents we had worked on. In 5 minutes, he sent to us on our phones. We saw the copies of the Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy that UNFPA, working with the government of Ghana, Ministry of Education, had worked on 2 years for. But in a matter of weeks, after a multi-stakeholder, this thing where the people in education, I'm sure some of them knew what they were pushing for. The name changed, processes changed, the document began to change. We were just fortunate. They called a stakeholder meeting at Osu Presby, and we had heard of what was happening. So we went there. I think there were probably like 15 of us. And we're the first to speak. The first 6 speakers, we stood up and kept indicating, this is bad. 4-year-olds cannot be taught how to wear condoms, you know? And they gave each of us just 2 minutes, but we made sure we aligned ourselves. For the first 6 people, we picked page by page by page of that policy document and demonstrated how evil this was. That was the end of that document. If citizens and Christians will not arise, keep their eyes open, and guard the gates, foreign influences will definitely affect us and affect our children.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before I give the closing, credits or remarks, can you please give your final remarks to us? What can you do? What can you say to encourage and assure us that if we participate, no matter how long it takes, I mean, it's possible for things to turn around?
In my reflections on Ghana and what can change Ghana, I have drilled down to the point that I clearly believe that the constituency left standing that has a responsibility to influence the political space and to influence Ghanaians at large is the church. If the church were to organize itself to begin to influence the discussions around our democratic responsibilities and not leave it to the politicians, but right in church, we are talking about our responsibilities and we are empowering our members each week as they go out to obey the governing authorities, as Romans 13 and verse 1 requires us to do. To ensure that we are behaving truly as salt and light, influencing the various departments and units, the decisions, whether at the board or ministerial or cabinet level. If the church understands that our responsibility is not just to collect money and not just give sermons that are nice, but make sure that the Christian sitting on our pews is being transformed into the likeness of Christ with a set of values that will go out there and influence their decisions. And that we are proactively ensuring that at the table, when they are doing policies, the church must be there to bring the Christian set of values to influence those decisions. When it is deciding at IPAC, when it is deciding at Electoral Commission or wherever, we are there. Between our numbers and the quality of our ethics, there's no reason why we should not change things. There's no reason why the constitutional change will not happen. There's no reason why the changes we want from the district level to the national level won't happen. It would take the church to understand that when God placed us here, it was not just to feel comfortable in our comfort zones. It was to go out there, influencing everything, including the political systems. That idea that Christianity has no place within the political system is a wrongly established notion or understanding of the Christian's responsibility within the scheme of things, within the nations, and within what God's agenda for this world is. I pray that each of us will ensure that we'll stand up. We will ensure that our churches, our fellowships, wherever we have opportunity to be impacting society, because that is our call. Our call is to go out, go and make. It means we must be on our way. We must be making disciples out of those in our departments, in our units, in cabinet, in the foreign service, in the Ministry of Finance. We must go and be making disciples. If the church were about its work of discipling the ministers, look, the ministers of government must be answerable to their church leaders. Church leaders must pay attention to all the ministers who are sitting there, the deputy ministers who are sitting in their churches, the heads of department. How are you making sure that they are standing tall for God? If the church were playing its role, we would turn this nation round, and its fortunes obviously will change. And I pray that in this year 2024, we will light the flame of that church through a renewed and proper understanding of our democratic responsibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One thing that keeps ringing in my head right now is we are the government. And like you said, especially as children of God, let's get to know not just our rights, but our obligations, and insist on the right thing or the right things to be done. Let's not just sit and complain, but let's get to know what we're entitled to and what we can do for the common good. Thank you so much. It's been a really good discussion, really worthwhile. And I have to say that my mind is changing gradually, because prior to this discussion, my mind was made up that this thing is not going anywhere. But you've educated me, you've enlightened my mind, so I'm going to do better. And I'm hopeful that everyone who has listened and those who are yet to listen will also have a change of mind in case they were where I was. Okay, thank you so much. We'll say a word of prayer. Before then, again, I want to remind us that if we haven't subscribed, please go to YouTube, type in the IMANI Reveals Show, subscribe, and then share the link with any other person you think will benefit from our discussions. This has been the IMANI Reveals Show, where we speak, we are real, so that we can live. All right. Uncle Edem, can you please pray to close us?
Father, in the mighty name of Jesus, we thank you for this privilege that we enjoy as citizens of our dear nation and motherland, Ghana. As part of that privilege, we have responsibilities or obligations as well as having rights. Father, for far too long, we have not understood our obligations and responsibilities to further the common good of our dear nation, Ghana. This evening, as we have walked this journey of understanding that democracies are founded on the principle of participation, and the primary right that expresses participation is when we vote. We have drawn the conclusion that not to vote is not to support the continuous existence of democracy. It is to spite ourselves and to create an environment where there will be chaos. We have understood that we have a responsibility to be at the table when discussions of what plans must be put in place, what budgets must be executed are being discussed. And not just then, but that we have a responsibility to come back to ask questions on how the budget has been executed and to speak up when resources have not been applied accordingly or appropriately. Lord, we have understood that if it takes holding hands with other citizens, other Christians to guard the gates, when we see ideas or policies or proposals that will not inure to the positive benefit of the majority, Lord, to stand up, to speak out, and to be part of those who ensure that these things do not find the light of day. Lord, empower us through the anointing of your Holy Spirit. Because this is not by might or by strength. It is only when your Holy Spirit opens up the eyes of understanding to discern what it is the enemy is trying to do, what it is those who are wicked and want to promote injustice and who do not want to support the welfare of the common citizen are intending to do. It is only when our eyes are open and our ears are paying attention that we'll be able to discern and be able to guard the gates. Lord, help us that through your Spirit we'll be alert to the enemy who prowls around seeking to steal, to kill, and destroy, and to stand him, resisting him firmly, as you encourage us to do in 1 Peter 5 and verse 9. May citizens of Ghana, and especially Christians, stand firm, holding hands together, and resist the onslaught of the enemy to send this nation spiraling into confusion and into destruction. Standing together, Lord, empower us to be true salt and light, preserving the nation, throwing light that exposes the darkness, the obstacles, and provides for us solutions and strategies to go around these hurdles. Lord, knowing full well that when you are for us and because you are with us, there is no mountain unsurmountable. There is no space or territory we will not possess. Because you are with us, where we step foot, we will possess the land. We will possess this nation. They will not be able to stand up against us. They will not be able to contend against us. Because, Lord, we are standing by your principles and promoting that which you have asked us to do so. May Ghana be transformed because of your children and for the sake of your children. To you be all the glory and honor from eternity to eternity, in Jesus' mighty and matchless name. And the saints shall say amen.
Amen. Thank you so much once again. God willing, we shall meet again on Monday. God bless us all and bless our homeland, Ghana. Bye.
And bye.